What happens when the most powerful figure in religion, dressed in white, crowned by tradition, chooses not to be exalted, but to kneel? Why would Pope Francis, the leader of over 1 billion Catholics, bow before convicted criminals and gently kiss their feet? And what message is being whispered to the world when a pope turns his back on a palace and walks toward a prison cell instead? A radical gesture in a cold world. Imagine a world where your worth is measured by your resume, your dignity tied to your bank account, and your failures are buried behind locked doors. In such a world, cold, fast, obsessed with perfection, Pope Francis did something quietly outrageous. It was Holy Thursday, a day the Church has long reserved to remember the night Jesus knelt before his disciples and washed their feet. A ritual that has echoed through centuries. But on that day in 2013, Pope Francis chose to do more than repeat a ritual. He chose to live it. Instead of stepping into the grandeur of St. John Lateran, the traditional cathedral for popes on this sacred occasion, he stepped into something raw, something real, a juvenile detention center on the edge of Rome, where others might see lost causes and wasted youth. He saw the face of God. He didn't come to lecture. He didn't come to be revered. He came to serve. He walked through the metal gates. He greeted the nervous faces. He entered the echoing room, simple and bare, with no stained glass or choir. Then, he bent down. Before 12 young inmates, some Christian, some Muslim, some without any faith at all, he poured water into a basin. One by one, he gently took their feet, washed them, dried them with a towel, and kissed them. These weren't the feet of saints. They were the feet of the condemned, the forgotten, the broken. And yet, in that moment, they were sacred. 12 souls, 12 stories, and one basin of water that would ripple far beyond those prison walls. It was a gesture that said, "You are not invisible. You are not unworthy. You are not the sum of your worst mistake." As the quiet act unfolded, something profound happened. The roles reversed. The powerful knelt. The broken were honored. And the whole world, for a brief moment, looked inward. What does it mean to lead by lowering yourself? What does it mean to remind the forsaken that they still matter? As the world absorbed the image of the Pope bending before prisoners, one question lingered. Where and how did this moment unfold? The day he kneeled in a prison. It was the 28th of March, 2013. Just days after Pope Francis had stepped into one of the most powerful roles on earth. The world expected tradition, a grand ceremony at the Lateran Basilica, complete with gold-trimmed vestments, incense curling through ancient air, and the pageantry befitting a pontiff. But Francis chose a different path. Instead of walking into marble halls, he walked through the gates of Casal del Marmo, a juvenile detention center on the outskirts of Rome. The building was simple, quiet worlds away from Vatican splendor. Inside were teenagers. Some had stolen, some had fought, some had been abandoned long before they ever broke the law. Many were imprisoned before they even understood what freedom meant. There were no trumpets to announce his arrival, no robes flowing behind him, no cameras arranged to capture every gesture. He came without grandeur. He rolled up his sleeves. He looked into their eyes. He knelt. It wasn't a performance. It was a presence. The Pope, the most revered figure in the Catholic world, crouched before kids the world had labeled as broken. He didn't ask what they'd done. He didn't preach at them. He simply served. No cathedral ceiling above him. No grand pulpit. Just a quiet act in a sterile room, where humility echoed louder than any sermon. In that moment, holiness was no longer about hierarchy. It wasn't about status, symbols, or sacred robes. It was about one human being kneeling before another, saying, without a single word, "You still matter." It was the kind of holiness that doesn't sit on thrones, but kneels on tiled prison floors. And what came next would challenge centuries of ritual and stir something much deeper. After the silence of the prison room and the humility of a pope on his knees, something even more powerful unfolded, something deeply human. When the untouchables are touched, the basin of water Pope Francis carried that day didn't discriminate. It wasn't reserved for the pious or the popular, the innocent or the clean. It was for everyone. Muslims, Christians, believers, doubters, boys hardened by street life, girls who had known more betrayal than love, the wounded, the wild, the ones society would rather forget. There was no checklist, no whispered judgment. He didn't lean down to investigate their sins. He didn't pause to consider their pasts. He simply knelt and saw them. In a world that is quick to categorize, to divide between the good and the bad, the worthy and the shamed, Pope Francis broke the pattern with quiet hands and a gentle cloth. And in doing so, he reminded us of something the world tries so hard to unteach. Your worth is not erased by your worst day. Asterisk. Asterisk. Your dignity does not vanish when society turns its back. These young inmates had been reduced to files, mugshots, mistakes. But in that sacred moment, they were none of those things. They were human. And the act of washing their feet became more than a ritual. It became a recognition that beneath every label lies a life, a soul, a story. How often do we, in our everyday lives, forget this? When we look at a homeless person, a former addict, a rebellious teen, do we still see the sacred underneath? That's what Pope Francis did. And as the basin emptied, it filled the world with a message it desperately needed to hear. A message we'll see deepen even further in the response and resistance that followed. The backlash that proved the point. But not everyone saw holiness in the Pope's basin. While many around the world were moved to tears by the image of a Pope kneeling before prisoners, others were shaken for a very different reason. Some were scandalized. How could the Pope, the guardian of tradition, wash the feet of women, of Muslims, of those society had branded as criminals? To them, it wasn't just unorthodox, it was unacceptable. Centuries of ritual had followed a predictable pattern. The feet of 12 Catholic men, often priests, symbolizing the 12 apostles. It was orderly, clean, expected. But Pope Francis had no interest in empty performance. He wasn't there to honor a mold, he was there to break it. And he did so with quiet defiance. He didn't argue, he didn't defend, he simply continued. Because to him, this was never about pleasing tradition, it was about awakening it. He believed the gospel was not a relic to be preserved behind glass. It was a living, breathing truth meant to be carried into the messiest places of our world. He once said, "We must go to the peripheries." And what are prisons, if not the edge of our collective compassion? What are condemned youth, if not the forgotten sheep the shepherd is called to seek? If Jesus could kneel before the one who would betray him, before Thomas who doubted, before Peter who denied, then surely the Pope could kneel before a boy the world had already condemned. In this resistance, Pope Francis found confirmation. The discomfort his actions provoked revealed the very walls he came to tear down. And in doing so, he reminded the Church and the world that sacredness is not always safe. Sometimes it disrupts, and the ripples of that disruption were only beginning. Not a performance, a philosophy. The ripples of that first prison visit didn't fade with the headlines. Year after year, Pope Francis has continued to kneel, but not for applause, not for legacy, and never for the camera. He kneels for something deeper, something unshakable: conscience. He has washed the feet of refugees fleeing war and famine, of women pulled from the dark corners of trafficking, of drug addicts grasping for another chance, of disabled elders long abandoned by society. Each time, the setting changes, but the message remains the same. That sacredness isn't stitched into ceremonial robes or titles. It pulses in the places we're taught to avoid. It lives in the moments when we choose not to look away, when we choose to see the addict, the refugee, the criminal, the outcast, and not turn our backs. For Pope Francis, mercy was never meant to be a chapter in a catechism or a line in a sermon. It is not a theory, not an idea. Mercy is movement. It is hands reaching into places the world has left behind. It is a pope robe lifted, basin in hand, returning again and again to the place where grace meets grit. And with each act, he redefines what holiness looks like. What would it mean if we too stopped performing kindness and started practicing it? This is the philosophy he lives by. And in the next chapter, we'll explore what this philosophy whispers to us here and now. What this whispers to us. Most of us will never wear white robes. We won't speak from balconies or enter rooms to global applause. But every day, we are offered something just as sacred: choice. The choice to judge or to listen, to pass by or to pause, to protect our pride or to offer our presence. We may not hold the title of Pope, but we hold power. The power to look someone in the eye and say, not with words, but with presence, "You matter." Because washing someone's feet was never about the water. It was never about the ritual. It was about recognition. It was about kneeling before another soul and saying, "I see your pain, and I choose not to look away." In today's world, where kindness is often staged for likes and compassion reduced to slogans, Pope Francis offered a reminder that the deepest love is the quiet kind. Asterisk. Asterisk. Not broadcasted, not perfect, not polished, but real. And in that stillness, in that unseen space where one heart reaches out to another, something sacred stirs. Something the world cannot manufacture. Something the soul never forgets. So, as we reflect on what it means to kneel, not with knees, but with attention, humility, and care, we begin to hear the deeper invitation. And that invitation leads us home.